Alright, so I've got it broke free. I used like a 4-foot long piece of galvanized pipe I had around the garage. My fancy homemade socket breaker bar that is welded onto half-inch drive wrench. And it finally came free. Thank goodness. I got the car jacked up in the front. I'm going to jack up the rear end and start to pull the drive shaft off. Then you have to go under the hood and undo the bolts around the bell housing and that engine right there, that little mount that holds the engine to the firewall, and undo basically everything that's connected to the transmission. Drop the transmission out and start replacing the clutch. So I'll get at it right now, and we'll do an update after. So I've gone ahead and taken the drive shaft out for this clutch removal and installation. It requires you to undo 4 12mm bolts. This end goes to the back of the vehicle at the differential, and then the front is a slip yoke right here that goes in the transmission. Then there's 2 14mm bolts. So I undid the 4 12mm bolts first, and I used a screwdriver through this hole to jam the drive shaft so that it wouldn't spin when I was putting torque on there. And then I hit these with I believe it was a 14mm, yeah, 14mm socket. Probably need an extension to get up in there past the exhaust. You very well could drop the exhaust first before doing the drive shaft, but I just wanted to pull the drive shaft out because I wanted to see what condition it was in. And it is a little, it's got a hard spot in the U-joints, and they're not necessarily serviceable, but they are kind of serviceable. I have one in my pile of drive shafts here that has been serviced, and basically use a press to press it out, and you put a 430-10 universal joint. I got them from a driveline place in the city of London, and they tend to work out pretty good. They're not the most heavy duty things, but they're about, oh god, they're expensive to replace brand new unless you can find one from a wrecker or a used parts guy. So after that, there's many different ways you can go about this. So I'm going to pull the exhaust off this car, and there's the header bolts. So there's 3 on each exhaust header, and then there's a 14mm bolt that's about halfway back here. It might even be bigger, it might be 15, but there's a bolt there, and that lets go of that part of the exhaust hanger. And then there will be a couple hangers back there. You just basically work it out and then pull it out the backside of the vehicle and get it out of your way so that you can get in and finish dropping this transmission. Here are the drive axles. There's one here and one there, and they have these roll pins that you got to push out with a punch, and then you can slide the drive shafts off. Another guy I've seen, he pops the drive shafts out right from the transmission, but I'm afraid I won't be able to get it back in, so I'm just gonna take the drive shafts off. Also, I might replace them because there are some cracking in the boots right there, as you can see. And this car isn't safety or e-tested or anything yet. It's not roadworthy. Not that it's not roadworthy, it's just not licensed yet. So without any further ado, we will continue on. Okay, so I've got everything unbolted in the front to start pulling out the CV axles. Like I said, the one guy, he pops them right off the transmission, but I'm going to push this here little push pin out with my little punch, and then I'm going to pull the drive shafts out, and that'll give me the room to unbolt the cross member that holds the transmission in and drop it down after doing all the undoing all the stuff like the bell housing and dumping the gearbox out of its gear oil. So I don't know if you can change the transmission without, or pull the transmission without. Oh, there it goes. So that's just it. Roll pin holds the drive shaft in. But I don't know if you can take the transmission out and not leak a bunch of oil everywhere. And that's roll pin number 2. And then when you undo the lower ball joint and all this assembly, you can work this axle shaft off. As you can see, it is now ready to come free from the motor or from the transmission, and on to the next step. So in order to get the half shafts or CV axles out, what you're going to have to do is, I've got the crown nut for the lower ball joint undone, and I'm going to take a pickle fork right here and put it in between the ball joint and the front hub here, and I'm going to drive this in and then pop it out. Hopefully it's in there like that, and there you go. Ball joint's free. Undo the crown nut. Make sure you keep all your parts together, and then I will go ahead and undo this linkage, and it'll allow me to push the A-frame down, or the lower control arm down, to pull this shaft out. I might also have to undo, which I've already got the nut already undone, the tie rod end as well. So now the exhaust has been dropped. The drive axles have been removed. This one would not come out of its hub, so I gotta take it and put it in the press and press it out. For some reason, I've tried so hard to get it out and it won't for some reason, but probably because it's been in there since 2003. And I've gone ahead, like I said, I've pulled the drive axles out. So here we go. You can see that there is the, where are you, son of a gun? Right there is the shaft that the drive axle goes on. The other one's on the other side. And I've got the oil, or the gear oil, all drained out as well. So next thing is to do is to go up top and undo the bolts around the bell housing, then come down here and undo the remainder of them. I think there's a connector and a couple grounds, and then there's the rear cross members for the transmission, one there and one at the back, and I believe those are 17 or 19 millimeter bolts. So I'll get back to you when I'm there. Okay, so I've gone around and undone the clutch cylinder and the bolts around the bell housing, as well as the connector bolts. I've undone a couple connectors as well. Anything that's holding the transmission on. And also undone the starter bolts as well. But one thing I wanted to show you was, you'll have to undo the shifter parts. So that's just a 12 millimeter bolt right there, and there's a big washer that goes on top of that. And you just pry that off there, and then you'll have to get up into there, and there's another bolt as well. I think there's a nut on the other side, and that'll be the last thing before undoing the cross members and then trying to break this beast free. Alright, so I've got all the bolts undone. Transmission's ready to come down. I made sure I went and disconnected the speed sensor there, or whatever that is. So what I have is 2 jacks. You can use a transmission jack. I have one, but it doesn't fit the clearance for working on the shop floor. So I'll have to modify it in the future. But basically I got 2 jacks. One to support the back, one to support the front, and I'll break it free If I can't get it to break free by gently rocking it, I will use a wood chisel to split the block from the transmission. It's actually pretty good. Alright, so after a bunch of prying and groaning and up and down, underneath the car, above the car, I've managed to get it free. I've used pry bars and some galvanized pipe that I had to help split this block. One thing you'll find is when you take the transmission and unbolt it and start getting it moving, the engine will come forward, so it helps put a piece of wood between the engine and the radiator or something to block it from moving forward too much. If you have an extra jack, you might be able to put it underneath the front of the engine, like on the crank pulley, but the car might be up too high if you're doing it on ramps in your garage like I am, or jack stands. So I do have it undone completely. It did get hung up on the mounting studs, the top and the bottom ones. I had to take the lower subframe or the cross member for the transmission and unbolt it, as you can see here. And I've got it suspended on two jacks. One's a scissor jack that I have made a impact attachment for. The other one's just my regular old floor jack, and then I will use them to gently let the transmission down, and then I'll just drag it out off this. I have a piece of plastic down here that helps things slide very freely. So let's hopefully this will come out a lot easier than I expected. I might have to jack the car up a little higher to get it out from underneath. I wasn't thinking about that when I did all this, so let's give it a shot, see what happens. It's always good just to have a look to make sure that you don't have any wires or anything that's gonna get caught and break on the way down. Come on. Try to keep your hands away from any areas that are going to get pinched, and just work your way down until you got it out. Hope I'm getting all this on film or on recording space. Oh shit. Okay. gracefully Okay, good. The output shaft does not, or the input shaft does not look bad at all. And if I'm lucky, I'll be able to just slide this out from underneath the car. Once I get it off my second jack there. Might be able to just get by there. Alright, so there's the OEM pressure plate and flywheel still attached to the engine. Just have to undo the bolts here, and the assembly should all come down. And then I'll take the flywheel off. I'm not going to resurface this one. I have a new flywheel coming with my clutch kit, so hopefully it'll all work out nicely. So I said they're flywheel bolts, but they're actually the pressure plate bolts. So I just used the pry bar to get the pressure plate free. So to get the flywheel bolts out, what I have is this here wrench that I welded. There's another way to do it, but this works great for me. These two bolts that I welded on here, they fit in the two of the 4 holes in the crank pulley, and I just jammed it up against, I guess that'd be the AC compressor belt, and then I just went on it with the Johnson bar from the top, and then I'll go under and just zip them off real quick with the impact, and then I'll have the flywheel off, ready for resurfacing or replacement.